My chapter book is on holes by Sachar. I'm reading chapter 47. The sun was up, and Stanley's heart was still beating. There were 8 lizards in the hole with him. Each one had exactly 11 yellow spots. The warden had dark circles under her eyes from a lack of sleep, and lines across her forehead and face which seemed exaggerated in the stark morning light. Her skin looked blotchy. Satan said 0. Stanley looked at him, unsure if he had even spoken or if he had just imagined it. Why don't you go see if you can take the suitcase from 0? The warden suggested. Yeah, right, said Mr. Sir. The lizards obviously aren't hungry, said the warden. Then you go get the suitcase, said Mr. Sir. They waited. Say Tan Lee, said 0. Sometime later, Stanley saw a tarantula crawl across the dirt, not too far from his hole. He had never seen a tarantula before, but there was no doubt what it was. He was momentarily fascinated by it, as its big hairy body moved slowly and steadily along. Look, a tarantula, said Mr. Sir, also fascinated. I've never seen one, said the warden, except in... Stanley suddenly felt a sharp sting on the side of his neck. The lizard hadn't bitten him, however, it was merely pushing off. It leapt off Stanley's neck and pounced on the tarantula. The last Stanley saw of it was one hairy leg sticking out of the lizard's mouth. Not hungry, huh? Said Mr. Sir. Stanley tried to return to the snow, but it was harder to get there when the sun was up. As the sun rose, the lizards moved lower in the hole, keeping mainly in the shade. They were no longer on his head and shoulders, but had moved down to his stomach, legs, and feet. He couldn't see any lizards on 0, but believed there were 2. Between 0's knees, shaded from the sun by the suitcase. How are you doing? Stanley asked quietly. He didn't whisper, but his voice was dry and raspy. My legs are numb, said 0. I'm going to try to climb out of the hole, Stanley said. As he tried to pull himself up, using just his arms, he felt a claw dig into his ankle. He gently eased himself back down. Is your last name your first name backward? 0 asked. Stanley stared at him in amazement. Had he been working on that all night? He heard the sound of approaching cars. Sir and the warden heard it as well. You think it's them? Said the warden. It ain't Girl Scouts selling cookies, said Mr. Sir. He had heard the cars come to a stop, and the doors opened shut. A little while later, he saw Mr. Pendenski and 2 strangers coming across the lake. One was a tall man in a business suit and a cowboy hat, and the other was a short woman holding a briefcase. The woman had to take 3 steps for every 2 taken by the man. Stanley Yelnats, she called, moving out ahead of the others. I suggest you don't come any closer, said Mr. Sir. You can't stop me, she snapped, then took a second glance at him, wearing pajama pants and nothing else. We'll get you out of here, Stanley, she said. Don't you worry. She appeared to be Hispanic with straight black hair and dark eyes. She spoke with a little bit of a Mexican accent, trilling her R's. What in tarnation? The tall man explained as he came up behind her. She turned on him. I'm telling you right now, if any harm comes to him, we'll be filing charges not only against Miss Walker and Camp Green Lake, but the entire state of Texas as well. Child abuse, false imprisonment, torture. And that's the most exciting part